Before we get to the show, I just want to let everyone know about the Vetted podcast, where I'm joined by the rest of the Vetted team, Amy and Sebastian, where we discuss the latest UAP news. Look for new episodes on Sundays. Back to the show. In this episode of Vetted, we'll speak to Nick Pope, find out if the United States has crashed UFOs, take a closer look at the Rendleshem forest sighting and the Cosford Sighting, and find out what are USO'S.
Seemingly vanished into the ocean.
All on this episode of Vetted. Our first vetted guest is Nick Pope,
My name's Nick Pope. I used to work for the
who in the early 1990s worked for the UK's Ministry of Defence,
Better be careful because I don't know how much of this is classified and what isn't.
investigating unidentified flying objects, or more commonly known as UFOs.
My name's Nick Pope. I used to work for the Ministry of Defence, where one of my jobs was investigating UFO sightings.
You've probably seen him on History Channel's Ancient Aliens and many other programs and documentaries discussing the UAP phenomenon.
When I ran the UK government's UFO program, we looked at UFOs, crop circles, alien abductions, anything mysterious and unexplained, I did it.
He's been dubbed the Fox Mulder of England from the popular Fox show The X-Files from the 90s. You might be surprised to learn where he leans when it comes to the question if we have been visited by aliens. But more on that in a minute. Let's begin with what Nick thinks about the latest U.S. government hearings and reports about UAPs. I'm curious just your opinion on these latest reports.
I mean, this is hugely beneficial to this subject. Absolutely. It cements the fact that this topic has transitioned from fringe to mainstream over the last 5.5 years or so. And there have been many steps on that road. Some of it has been the release of some of those US Navy videos that everyone's seen. But you mentioned specifically the reports. And yeah, that's a huge part of this. We've had 2 reports now from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and they've made very interesting reading. It's not been disclosure quite as the UFO community means it. But if anyone thought a few years ago that we'd be getting reports from ODNI, the same sorts of people that do reports on Russia and China and North Korea and things like that, if anyone thought we'd be getting reports on UAP, you'd have waved it away and said, no, that'll never happen. And here we are.
People in the community will accuse the U.S. government of hiding things and disinformation, and then they release information. It becomes very hard. These are the same people that aren't necessarily being, forward with us. Are they being forward with us here? Let's recap. Nick is basically saying that it's a benefit that the United States government is studying these UAP sightings. UAP, by the way, is just another way of saying UFO. We'll put research links in the description. Let's move on. Does the United States have a crashed UFO?
The United States is in possession of exotic material.
Let's hear from some current and former heads of the UAP task force to find out what they think. Here's our first clip.
Does our government have downed UFOs from unknown origin that they've been trying and are trying to reverse engineer and exploit those technologies to understand the physics and understand that technology? Do we have that to work with?
I can't talk about that, but the answer is yes.
That's interesting. So you have Colm Kelleher, former head of the UAP task force, confirming that we are reverse engineering advanced alien spacecraft. This is quite a bombshell. And what was the name of the UAP task force he was the head of? It was called AAWSAP, which stands for Advanced Aerospace Weapons Applications Program. One of the many UAP task force you'll learn about. On April 19th, 2023, U.S. congressional hearing was held. And Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who is the current head of the UAP task force, said this.
I should also state clearly for the record that in our research, AARO has found no credible evidence thus far of extraterrestrial activity, off-world technology, or objects that defy the known laws of physics.
So we have the former head of the UAP task force saying we do have downed alien spacecraft. Then you have the current head of the UAP task force saying we don't. But it gets even more interesting.
So look, I think we all want to know, do you think any government has recovered a crashed UAP?
So what I've said for the record, which is unfortunately all I can say, is that it is my belief that the United States is in possession of exotic material, and unfortunately, that's about all I can say at this time.
Wow, they don't make it easy. So you also have another former head of the UAP task force, another task force, I'll get to that later, saying we do have exotic material. Do you ever feel like you're just getting further away from the truth?
Call it spacecraft, if you will, non-human, exotic origin, vehicles that have either landed or crashed.
We have spacecraft from another species.
We do, yeah.
How many?
Quite a number.
You're kidding.
No.
The person you just heard from is David Grush. He's a UFO whistleblower who just came out this first week of June 2023. In fact, after we had already finished editing this episode. So we'll do a better vetted background check on David Grush and his claims in a later episode. But I thought it was worth mentioning since we've been discussing this. So where do we go from here? These are quite crazy claims that, in my opinion, they do need to be vetted, and we do need to look into them.
As in a lot of things, the government isn't moving in a single direction on this. It's not as if it's a single monolithic entity. And what I see playing out now, sometimes through the media, is a sort of factional dogfight between what I like to call almost like a skeptic and a believer wing or faction within the Department of Defense, within military intelligence, within other parts of the US intelligence community. So it's not surprising that we're getting a little bit of mixed messages. One moment you've got like a NORAD press conference in the aftermath of the Chinese spy balloon saga, where one of the reporters asks, well, with the other three that you shot down, I mean, have you ruled out the extraterrestrial question? And the general replied, at this point, I haven't ruled out anything. And then anonymous national security sources walked that back within almost minutes, I think. And then it was kind of ridiculed a bit in the White House press conference the following day by the press secretary. So there are these two factions, and at the moment they are jostling for position and fighting for narrative control. So yeah, it is confusing. And we are getting these, as I say, mixed messages coming out of the system.
White House press room. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre speaks about the Chinese balloon shot down over U.S. waters.
There is no indication of aliens or terrestrial activity with these recent takedowns. Wanted to make sure that the American people knew that, all of you knew that, and it was important for us to say that from here because we've been hearing a lot about it. I'm not. Would you tell us? I'm just, I loved E.T., the movie, but I'm just going to leave it there.
Let's recap. So we do and we don't have alien, exotic, extraterrestrial material, or whatever they want to call it. And we are and we're not reverse engineering it. It's a little confusing, isn't it? Well, we're not done with this particular part of the episode. We'll come back to it. Research links in the description. This has been vetted for now. Now let's have another conversation with Nick Pope about Avi Loeb, the Harvard astronomer who started the Galileo project to study UAPs privately, away from the US government. I heard and read that you're involved in the Galileo project that's been started by Avi Loeb, who we're actually having on as well. I'm speaking to him next week. What is that? What's the main goal, and how are you involved?
Well, I should say I'm not a scientist or an astronomer, but Avi Loeb has brought in to his Galileo project a number of people who non-scientists, but people with some relevant background and knowledge that might help the wider Galileo project aims. And we are research affiliates. So our role is just advisory, and it's to advise Avi and his science team on anything where he feels that he would benefit from some advice. And I mean, I'll let Avi unpack the different strands of what Galileo project is actually doing, but it falls into a number of categories, including looking at new UAP data that will be gathered, but also looking at, obviously, Avi, was already very well known, but came to even wider international fame because of his views on Oumuamua, and the idea that there might be these interstellar objects, and frankly, we don't know what they are. And of course, Avi's point is, well, that's what science is. You have a question, you put a hypothesis forward, and then you try and test it. And you test it by designing experiments and gathering data. So Avi is doing a lot of that. I know he's got an expedition coming up to try and recover fragments from another interstellar object of some kind. He's written a number of papers about this. As I say, I don't want to encroach on his territory, but I think you'll have a fascinating conversation with him. I mean, he's truly one of the great visionary thinkers of our time. Although he's in the forefront of it, I think he's beginning to bring a lot of other people in the scientific community round to his way of thinking, that for far too long, scientific community was very dismissive of this, whereas Avi's point is simply should take a data-led approach. So yeah, I'm honored and proud to be a very small part of the Galileo project, and I know that a number of other non-scientists, but people with relevant perhaps backgrounds, people like Chris Mellon and Lou Elizondo, are also in this research role. So it's exciting times, and I think you'll have an illuminating conversation with Avi about all this.
Oh yeah, I cannot wait to dig into that. I'm sure he's going to use terms I don't understand, but hopefully our viewers and listeners will. I'm just here to ask the questions.
He's actually very good. I mean, although obviously he is a world-renowned astrophysicist, he's also, I think, increasingly a science communicator. And to be a science communicator, you have to have that art of putting the science in layperson's terms. And I think, so he may use a few long terms. Gosh, it took me months to figure out how to pronounce Oumuamua, but that's another story.
Oumuamua. Pretty straightforward once you know.
There is no federal funding for research on this subject. And therefore, after my book appeared, a number of very wealthy individuals decided to contribute to my research account, and I established the Galileo project, which aims to study those objects near Earth that might be of extraterrestrial technological origin. So we are breaking the mold with this project in the sense that it's a circular argument. It is self-fulfilling prophecy to say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and then not seek the evidence. Obviously, if you're not seeking the evidence, you will not find any extraordinary evidence.
Let's recap. Nick is working with the Galileo project with Harvard professor Avi Loeb, whom we did speak to and dive deep into the Galileo project, so look forward to that episode. It's quite interesting to hear both their sides of what that project is about. Research links in the description. This has been vetted. Let's move on. Rendlesham Forest, UK, 1980s, multiple witnesses, actual audio recordings during the events, a UFO touchdown. Let's hear from Nick.
Rendlesham Forest incident from the UK, sometimes called Britain's Roswell, although it wasn't a crash, it was actually a landing. But that's a great case because you've got everything in this single incident that makes a case compelling. It took place over 3 consecutive nights. It involved multiple witnesses. Most of them were military. The UFO was briefly tracked on radar, and best of all, it left physical trace evidence, burn marks on the ground and scorch marks up the sides of some of the trees. This Rendlesham forest lies between two United States military bases in the UK, and the deputy base commander, who was very skeptical about sightings on the first and second night, he himself saw this thing on the third night, and the file, or the Ministry of Defense file on this, has been declassified and released. So it's not just stories. There's a paper trail that people can follow. So I think that's case number one.
FlyingSaucery.com? I guess there could be some relevant information there. I've found stuff on UFO websites myself. I guess we're all using the same sources? Let's take a closer look at the Rendlesham Forest case that Nick has brought up. We'll dive deeper into a special clip from a YouTube show called The Basement Office. It's co-hosted by Stephen Greenstreet and Nick Pope.
Well, this is December 1980. Personnel saw these strange lights in the forest, thought that maybe an aircraft had come down and was burning. So they went out, of course, to investigate and found not a crashed aircraft, but a landed UFO. John Burroughs and Jim Penniston, who, out of the people who went to investigate, were the two who actually then went forward to approach the craft.
Later in the Basement Office episode, they interviewed Jim Penniston about what he saw. Here's an excerpt from that clip.
As I got closer to the craft, the fabric of the craft where this color was running through, it finally just dissipated and stopped. And all that left was the black opaque craft, which was shiny in nature. And I would describe it as looking like black glass. And it was obvious it was not U.S. Air Force craft.
This is real declassified audio from the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident, taken by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt.
305, we see strange strobe-like flashes to the rather sporadic, but there's definitely something, some kind of phenomenon. It's moving out fast. This one on the right heading away too. Yeah, we're both heading north. Okay, here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. Well, we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground.
The initial sighting, 3 a.m. on December 26th, when the airmen saw something apparently descending into the forest, coincided with the appearance of a bright fireball over southern England, and such fireballs are a common source of UFO reports. The supposed landing marks were identified by police and foresters as rabbit diggings. No evidence has emerged to confirm that anything actually came down in the forest. Let's recap. Okay, this one's quite exciting. There's a lot of good evidence, but there's also some pretty good standard explanations for what happened. I don't know. What do you think? Kind of up to you. Take a look at the documents. We'll put research links in the description. There's lots of video clips also to look at. This has been vetted. Next, the Cosford sighting. Another great sighting that took place in the UK. Great evidence and really just some crazy things that happened.
Across southern England, reports flooded in of strange lights moving in a northeast.
Almost literally as we speak, 30 years old. It's generally known as the Cosford incident, a wave of sightings that took place in 1993 over large parts of the UK. Huge triangular-shaped craft, narrow beam of light, low-frequency humming sound, lots of police and military witnesses. I led the investigation. Again, my case file from the MOD has been declassified and released and sent to the National Archives. So again, this isn't just hearsay. People can actually read the case file for themselves.
The following is a news segment featuring our guest, Nick Pope, about the Cosford sighting. It focuses on one witness who the UK Ministry of Defence and Nick Pope himself claims to be their most reliable testimony. They don't mention the witness's name, but I found it. I'll reveal his name in the new story he later told about the incident. Let's jump in.
On the night of 30th of March 1993, across southern England, reports flooded in of strange lights moving in a northeasterly course. They formed the outline of a massive black triangle. The most dramatic sighting that night was here around the Royal Air Force's Shawbury base in Shropshire.
Remember this helicopter.
Of all the accounts, the most compelling was filed by the on-duty meteorological officer at a nearby base.
And that meteorological officer's name? Wayne Elliott. Remember that name.
He saw it initially move slowly towards the base, and he said it's very slow speed, maybe 30 or 40 miles an hour. And then he heard this low-frequency humming sound, which he said was quite unpleasant, rather like standing in front of a bass speaker. He said he could feel the sound as well as hear it. He saw this narrow beam of light firing down from the craft, and from this very slow speed, the UFO accelerated away to the horizon in seconds. And he described this to me as many times faster than a military jet aircraft.
And this is a credible military witness?
This is an Air Force officer with 8 years service.
And you believed it?
Absolutely.
But even more interesting, the investigators from the Defence Department were unable to explain that mystery, even to this day.
Skeptics, however, have put forward rather more prosaic explanations. On the evening of March 30th, 1993, Russia launched a radio satellite into orbit. The rocket booster, which took it into space, re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, breaking into 2 or more pieces as it did so. All of the sightings of bright lights coincide with the computer simulation of where the fragments would have been visible. So let's look at the case files Nick Pope mentioned. The case files are over 100 pages, and they detail quite a bit of information, but I'll let you go through the files. We'll put links in the descriptions. But I did find this one particular page quite interesting. 2, possibly 3, star-shaped with vapor trail when moving. That's interesting. Remember when I said this? The rocket booster, which took it into space, re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, breaking into 2 or more pieces as it did so. And remember this?
Of all the accounts, the most compelling was filed by the on-duty meteorological officer at a nearby base.
Remember Wayne Elliott? And meteorological officer Wayne Elliott, whose evidence at Shawbury was central, has pointed out that his sighting was an hour after the one at Cosford, and he now believes what he saw was a police helicopter. That's interesting.
But even more interesting, the investigators from the Defence Department were unable to explain that mystery, even to this day.
There's a great website with all the information you could want about Cosford. We'll put a link in the description. And that's the problem sometimes. One story becomes another story. Another interesting part about this Cosford incident, Nick believes the high-profile event formed part of the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program, which Luis Elizondo ran. That is the UAP task force. At least one of them. You might remember him from...
It is my belief that the United States is in possession of exotic material.
That's interesting. Now, I asked Nick what the most fascinating part about studying UFOs for the UK's Ministry of Defence, and he said this.
So, I mentioned the Cosford incident. Literally that thrill of coming into the office, the phone's ringing, taking the first report, putting it down, the next phone rings.
Wow. Now, you can tell Nick is clearly excited about telling this story, and I'm laughing along with him because it's also exciting. And that becomes an issue during the investigation of UFOs? Is it fascinating? Is it exciting? Is it thrilling? All of the above. Does that get in the way for the search for the truth? Nick's a great guy, and I've really enjoyed our interview so far, and there's more to come. But I thought it was interesting to point out that we can't let our emotions get in the way for our search for the truth, which I am guilty of as well.
I mean, there are lots of civilian ufologists doing great work, but of course we were doing this investigative work from within government. So of course we had all sorts of advantages. I mean, literally, as I say, you just lift the phone, speak to the radar experts in the Air Force, and next minute the tapes are being delivered to your office. I mean, this is something that ufologists could only dream of.
Let's recap. Now, this one is a doozy, the Cosford sighting. The whole helicopter thing is quite interesting, right? He recants the story later on, basically saying he saw a helicopter. I don't know. It's up to you. What do you think? We'll put links in the description. For me, it's been vetted. Now, let's revisit the conversation about, does the U.S. government have crashed UFOs? But let's talk to Nick about this, because I'm still just not on board with it.
No credible evidence thus far of extraterrestrial activity.
Yeah, everything happening in the U.S. right now, those U.S. Navy videos. And again, they didn't just show up. Well, actually, one of them did. I was going to say show up on YouTube. Actually, one of the three did some years ago, but that's another story. The point I was going to make is that they are on the Department of Defense website, confirmed as authentic U.S. Navy videos, with a press release saying that and saying that they remain unidentified. So again, you've got this paper trail that you can follow, whether it's those US Navy videos or some of the other photos and videos that have come out since. And of course, everything going on in Congress right now on this. We've had one set of public hearings last May.
I do not have an explanation for what this specific object is.
And there are going to be more hearings coming up. I'm being reliably informed.
Our interview with Nick Pope was recorded in March 2023, before it became public knowledge and we learned this.
I should also state clearly for the record that in our research, AARO has found no credible evidence thus far of extraterrestrial activity, off-world technology, or objects that defy the known laws of physics.
Some witnesses have already given behind closed doors testimony to some of these committees and subcommittees, sometimes to the congressional representatives, mostly in the first instance, I think, to some of the staffers who are just trying to get everything prepped for what will, I'm sure, be at least one more public hearing this year, maybe more. And all this stems from the fact that there are multiple UAP provisions in the newly signed defense bill, which again is unheard of. The idea that this is now written into the legislation, into the omnibus defense bill, where basically the Pentagon sets out pretty much everything that it's going to do. But Congress has mandated that there be a report on everything that's been learned since January 1st, 1945 onwards, any programs that the government has run, any materials that they've recovered. And in parallel with that, one of the other provisions in the bill is a sort of whistleblower clause, which says that anyone with knowledge of these programs, direct or indirect, can come forward and testify to Congress, even if they think that they're still bound by a non-disclosure agreement or any other form of secrecy oath. The legislation has released them from that and said that they can come forward and testify to Congress. So there's a lot going on right now.
But have you actually seen yourself, like, videos that are not public, pictures that are not public? You said the Rendleshem forest, like, you saw, physical evidence yourself, like put your hands on it? Or
Yeah, I've seen I've seen some physical evidence, photos, videos, some materials that people say are anomalous. I don't know. I don't have the scientific expertise to evaluate them. Others do.
Sure.
I mean, I think the way I would characterize it is to say that I have not seen a smoking gun
Yeah.
that absolutely definitively proves to me beyond any reasonable doubt that this is extraterrestrial. But collectively, I've seen a lot of evidence that suggests that, shall we say, there's more to this than just aircraft lights and weather balloons, or even
Sure.
spy balloons.
We're checking Twitter on several different official. Oh, well, I believe it just happened there.
Just a quick, I always found this funny that with all these sightings and everything, that they talk about lights and lights and lights. And I think these beings traverse the universe, and they're still using LED lights. That sounds odd to me. But who knows, right? I don't know what to make of that. I always just found that odd that they're just using like spotlights or these things.
I take the point. I mean, people often say, why would UFOs need lights? And of course, when we think of that, it does sound a little absurd because you imagine a commercial aircraft with its anti-collision lights and things like that. But then that's an anthropocentric perspective. The fact of the matter is we have no idea what these lights are. I mean, they might be anti-collision lights for all I know. If there are lots of UFOs flying around, maybe they do need to steer clear of each other like that. But it's equally likely that they could be something else. The light could simply be a byproduct of the energy source, propulsion system. We have no idea.
I mean, at the end of the day, you're right. Right? That
That
is true.
I always have a problem with people who say aliens wouldn't do this because, and I'm like, wait, how do you know?
I mean, you're not wrong. That is the strange high wire to balance on, right? It is that we don't know. And anyone really making definitive statements one way or the other, I would say, is an issue. And this is my issue with this topic. Who is telling the truth?
I should also state clearly for the record that in our research, ARROW has found no credible evidence thus far of extraterrestrial activity, off-world technology, or objects that defy the known laws of physics.
Who can we trust?
It is my belief that the United States is in possession of exotic material.
Who has the answers?
Does our government have downed UFOs from unknown origin that they've been trying and are trying to reverse engineer and exploit those technologies to understand the physics and understand that technology? Do we have that to work with?
I can't talk about that, but the answer is yes.
Who do we believe? Dr. Colm Kelleher here? Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick? Luis Elizondo? All former and current heads of the UAP task force. The government's resource into looking for UFOs, basically the people we should trust. And none of them have the same story. Are they getting different information? Or are they all just part of some elaborate plan to trick us all? How can we find the truth? I'm not sure we can. And don't forget, this happened.
Call it spacecraft if you will, non-human, exotic origin, vehicles that have either landed or crashed.
We have spacecraft from another species.
We do, yeah.
How many?
Quite a number.
You're kidding.
No.
Earlier I mentioned how surprised you'd be to learn what Nick thinks of the question, have we been visited by extraterrestrials? Do you think they have definitively come here and visited us, or what is your, position?
My basic position is this: life out there in the universe, absolutely.
Yeah.
Other civilizations, elsewhere in the universe? Absolutely. Extraterrestrial visitation? I'm undecided. I think there is some intriguing evidence, but no definitive proof. I think, you always get into a debate about this. At what point does evidence become proof? And what's the standard that we're applying here? And just as in the criminal justice system, during some cases and in some jurisdictions, it will be on the balance of probability. And in other cases, it will be beyond reasonable doubt. We're certainly, to my mind, we're not in beyond reasonable doubt territory on this, but I certainly don't rule it out. I think there are a lot of interesting pointers. And I think, again, if there weren't these pointers, Congress wouldn't be interested in the way that they are. We wouldn't have these multiple provisions in the defense bill. We wouldn't have had 2 reports from ODNI. We wouldn't have all these US Navy videos being released. We wouldn't have people like Avi Loeb looking at UAP and saying, wait, maybe we've missed a trick here. We should take a look and see what we've got. None of this would be happening. I mean, there's no smoke without fire.
The government is extremely interested in this subject. They established a new office, which is supposed to document all anomalies about objects in our atmosphere, because they keep seeing things. I mean, it's their day job to monitor the atmosphere and look for suspicious objects. Part of the day job, they see things and they get curious. So they establish this office, which is supposed to get to the bottom of it. Committees that are funding research, scientific research, populated by mainstream scientists who basically say, we don't want to take risky propositions. We don't want to waste taxpayers' money. Well, if you ask the taxpayers, they would tell you that this question is more exciting for them.
Let's recap, because we need it on this one. Are you as confused as me? Yeah, don't worry. Look, we've got current and former heads of these government agencies saying we do and we don't have alien craft. What do we think? I don't know. It's up to you. Research links in the description. For me, this is vetted. We'll keep an eye on it. Let's get to an interesting topic called USO'S, unidentified submerged objects.
Something going the speed of sound underwater.
Yeah. Spear seemingly vanished into the ocean.
We talk a lot about aerial sightings and this, that. Do you know of any underwater sightings?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. This is one of the reasons why this phrase transmedium travel has now entered the language when we talk about this. And Lou Elizondo, of course, and Chris Mellon have played a big part in evolving the conversation and bringing this in and saying, hey, look, it's not just airborne. There are apparently these objects, some of them that can seamlessly move apparently between space and then our atmosphere and then under the oceans.
The unidentified spear seemingly vanished into the ocean.
Whoa, splash.
And that's very interesting for all sorts of reasons, because again, it makes us have to rethink, even the hypotheticals about propulsion systems and what kind of a propulsion system something would have to do. But there have been fairly reliable reports talking about these USO'S, unidentified submerged or submersible objects.
One of the most compelling underwater sightings ever witnessed took place in the late 1990s on board a United States nuclear submarine called the USS Hampton. The following is an eyewitness account of that sighting by Dr. Bob McGuire, who was on board the USS Hampton when the incident occurred.
Nothing can move faster than the speed of sound in air underwater because water's incompressible. There was no cavitation. It was just weird.
Like, how long was the engagement?
Oh, it couldn't have been more than a few seconds because it blew by us and was gone.
And was there any other indications?
Or just it didn't return.
Only sensor indications? There was no indications?
No, because we were too deep for anything else. These submarines can go faster and deeper than most people realize. I will not tell you what that is because that's classified.
But so you're saying that while extremely deep behind enemy lines, you saw something going the speed of sound underwater?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if you go right back to 47, we had flying saucer, then we had UFO, then we had UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. But now things have moved even further. And of course, UAP is not really sufficient to incorporate these USO'S, which is why the new Pentagon office that replaced the old UAP task force is called AARO, AARO, which stands for All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. So all domain includes not just the atmosphere, but space and undersea as well. So again, there's a lot going on, and yeah, these USO'S are extremely interesting. And again, to move that fast, I mean, I think we're getting into areas that are probably classified, and I can't go into too much detail. But if people look up the term supercavitation, it's one of the holy grails of Navy folks is supercavitating submarines and torpedoes. Obviously, the water resistance is a big problem.
What does that word mean?
It's a way of effectively. Well, again, you know what? I better be careful because I don't know how much this is classified and what isn't. But the unclassified version is simply that it's a way of making, for example, torpedoes go much faster than a conventional torpedo. So it would completely change the balance of power. And when you think that obviously nuclear deterrence depends to a fairly large extent on submarine launched ballistic missiles, it's why anything that impacts on this is of huge interest and potential concern.
Now let's recap. This is a little scary. These UFOs or UAPs, whatever you want to call them, are getting close to our nuclear silos, submarines, and missiles. And the fact that they can go from air to space to underwater is pretty interesting. We'll put links in the description. This has been Vetted. Now that's the end of our interview of part 1 with Nick Pope. Make sure to tune in for part 2, where we continue our conversation about the connection between UFOs and our nuclear capabilities.
A lot of people in the UFO community have said, is it any coincidence that we developed and then used in anger the bomb in 1945, and then 2 years later we had Kenneth Arnold, flying saucers, and then Roswell, and the birth of the modern phenomenon? Did this put us on the map?
We'll also discuss what UFO disclosure actually means and how it could impact society.
You know, what will be the impact on politics, religion, science, technology, the economy? Because make no mistake about it, every aspect of society will be impacted in a profound way, I'm sure.
Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Follow us on Twitter at Vetted Podcast. This is Vetted.